In the heart of New York City, they whispered a name for her: the Ice Queen. Vanessa Sterling was not merely engaged to the most feared man in the five boroughs, she was a force of nature, completely untouchable. She possessed the ring, the immense fortune, and commanded the silent terror of every person she met. But she made a single, devastating error. She failed to remember that the person serving her food is a silent witness to everything. Because of that oversight, a billion-dollar dynasty is poised to shatter tonight. A lavish wedding will be called off. The most dreaded woman in the city will forfeit everything she has. And it all begins with the truth revealed by one silver fork. You are about to discover how a simple waitress dismantled a mafia queen. This is more than just a story about revenge. This is a reminder that the people society overlooks, the ones who serve your food, clean your tables, and stand quietly in the shadows, they see everything. And sometimes, it is the person with nothing to lose who has the courage to do what no one else will. Stay until the very end, because this story will change the way you look at every person who has ever served you. The downpour in Tribeca did nothing to cleanse the city's grit. It only amplified the glare of neon lights on the slick, wet streets. Inside Loro, Manhattan's most exclusive Italian restaurant, the atmosphere was different. The air was warm and still, thick with the scent of expensive truffle oil and a deep, unspoken dread. Sarah's fingers ached from how tightly she gripped the silver serving tray, her knuckles showing white. She caught a glimpse of herself in the dark kitchen door window. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her apron immaculate, but her eyes held a profound exhaustion. At 24 years old, she was working relentless double shifts, all to settle the crushing gambling debts her father had left behind. And this specific evening was the one she had been fearing all week long. "Table 4 has arrived," her manager, Mr. Ritchie, hissed, using a cloth to wipe beads of sweat from his shining bald head. "Do not take a breath unless they grant you permission. Do not look Mr. Moretti in the eye. And for the love of all that is holy, Sarah, do not do anything to upset her." He never had to speak her name. Vanessa Sterling. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath the second the massive oak doors swung open. It felt as if all the oxygen had been vacuumed from the space. Two bodyguards stepped inside first, colossal men dressed in suits that easily cost more than everything Sarah had ever earned in her life. Following them was Dante Moretti. Dante was nothing like the brutal figure the tabloids portrayed. He did not carry himself like a common criminal. He moved with the effortless confidence of royalty. He was wearing a charcoal Brioni suit that was tailored with absolute perfection. His dark hair was elegantly swept back from a face that was a perfect sculpture of bored, deadly intelligence. This was the man who held the shipping docks, the powerful unions, and nearly half of New York's real estate in his grasp. Yet, he walked with a serene, quiet grace. But every single eye in the room was fixed on the woman who was clinging tightly to his arm. Vanessa Sterling was, without question, a beautiful woman, but her beauty was sharp and synthetic, like a flawless, cold diamond. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, priceless diamonds hung from her ears, and a contemptuous sneer seemed to be a permanent feature on her bright red lips. She walked with a noticeable limp, putting heavy pressure on a specially crafted cane topped with a large pearl handle. "My leg, Dante," she complained, her voice piercing the quiet and causing the jazz pianist in the corner to falter. "This floor is dangerously slippery. Have they even bothered to clean it properly? Or is their goal to have me killed before our wedding day?" Dante's cold expression remained unchanged, but his grip on her arm tightened, providing her with more stability. "It is made of marble, Vanessa. It is supposed to be polished. Just walk carefully." She snapped back at him. "I cannot believe you are forcing me to eat in this place," as she threw her expensive coat at a young busboy, without even glancing in his direction. "It smells of garlic and desperation." Sarah drew in a long, steadying breath. As the head waitress for the exclusive VIP section, she had managed difficult clients before, from arrogant Wall Street bankers to intoxicated senators. She convinced herself she could manage a mafia boss's fiancé. With practiced and graceful movements, she approached their table and placed the heavy menus down. Good evening, Mr. Moretti. Miss Sterling, it is a pleasure to have you back at Loro. May I begin by getting you some water? Vanessa immediately cut her off, her eyes still glued to her phone. Sparkling. It must be room temperature, and if I notice a single bubble that seems overly aggressive, I will send it back. Also, you need to change this napkin, it feels like I'm touching sandpaper. Sarah hesitated for a moment. The napkin was made from 100% pure Egyptian cotton, the finest available. Of course, ma'am, right away. Dante finally looked up from his phone. His eyes were a deep, dark brown, almost black, and for a fleeting second, they met Sarah's. There was no threat in his gaze, only a profound, weary curiosity. He appeared to be a man imprisoned within a gilded cage he had constructed for himself. Your name is Sarah, is it not? Dante asked, his voice unexpectedly low and raspy. Sarah felt a jolt of shock and froze in place. He actually knew her name. Yes, sir. Ignore her request for the napkin. It is perfectly fine, Dante said, dismissing the issue with a small wave of his hand. Just bring us the wine list. We will have the Bulgari from 1996. Vanessa slammed her phone down hard on the table. The sharp crack echoed through the now completely silent dining room. Excuse me? Are you seriously undermining me directly in front of the help? In front of this absolute nobody? I am just trying to have a peaceful dinner, Vanessa, Dante replied, the muscle in his jaw tightening visibly. I am the future Mrs. Moretti, she hissed, leaning across the table with menace. When I declare that the napkin is sandpaper, then it is sandpaper. And you, she redirected her poisonous glare to Sarah. Stop gawking at my fiancé. I see exactly what you are doing. Do you believe you can flutter your little eyelashes and earn a bigger tip? You are nothing but dirt. Now go and get me my water. Sarah immediately lowered her gaze, retreating toward the kitchen with her heart pounding violently against her ribs. She is so much worse tonight. Rocco, the restaurant's sous chef, whispered the words as he carefully arranged an appetizer on a plate. The gossip on the street says the wedding is happening next month. She is on edge because Dante still has not signed the prenuptial agreement. She is desperate to lock him down for good. She is a complete monster, Sarah muttered, reaching for a fresh, cold bottle of San Pellegrino. Be very careful, Sarah, Rocco warned, gesturing toward her with a soup ladle. Dante Moretti is a very dangerous man, it is true. But that man lives by a certain code of honor. Vanessa, on the other hand, she has no code at all. She would destroy your life just for entertainment. I heard a story that she had the valet fired last week simply because he adjusted his own rearview mirror while she was sitting in the car. Sarah gave a slight nod, her hands instinctively smoothing the front of her clean apron. She desperately needed to keep this job. The money was essential. Her plan was to become invisible, to be nothing more than a ghost in the room. But she knew that ghosts often see the secrets that the living work so hard to conceal. When Sarah made her way back to the table, the atmosphere was so heavy with tension you could practically slice it with a steak knife. Vanessa was putting on a grand performance of her supposed disability. My hand is cramping up again, Vanessa moaned loudly, holding up her left hand for Dante to see. It was the same hand that wore the massive 10-carat diamond engagement ring. She massaged her wrist with dramatic flair. The nerve damage from that terrible car accident, it is flaring up again. Dante, my love, you will need to cut my steak for me this evening. I can barely even hold onto a fork. Dante let out a quiet sigh and took a slow sip of his expensive wine. Well, you seemed perfectly fine at the gallery opening this morning, Vanessa. That was adrenaline, she snapped back instantly. I was suffering in silence the entire time. You never, ever listen to me. The doctor clearly explained that the nerves in my left hand are completely shredded. I have absolutely zero grip strength. If I happen to drop something, it is certainly not my fault. Sarah poured the sparkling water with quiet precision, her eyes focused on Vanessa's left hand. The fingers were adorned with a perfect manicure, resting lifelessly on the pristine white tablecloth. I will need a straw, Vanessa demanded, her gaze fixing on Sarah. She looked directly at Sarah. I cannot lift this glass. It is my wrist. I will get that for you right away, Sarah replied in a soft, professional tone. As Sarah started to turn away, she witnessed something peculiar. Vanessa reached for her small clutch bag using her supposedly injured left hand. The motion was incredibly fast, almost a jerk, as she snatched the bag and pulled it closer to her plate, as if she were trying to hide something inside. The movement was swift and precise, not the clumsy fumbling of a person with shredded nerves and no strength. Sarah paused for just a fraction of a second, a small frown forming on her face before she continued toward the bar. Why would someone lie about a hand injury? Sarah understood that wealthy people often craved drama, but this felt different, more specific and calculated. By the time she came back with the straw, the appetizers had been served. It was carpaccio, thinly sliced and topped with truffle shavings. This smells completely rancid, Vanessa announced to the room, wrinkling her nose in disgust. She picked up her fork with her right hand and poked disdainfully at the delicate meat. Dante, tell them to take this garbage away. I want the lobster risotto instead, and you can tell the chef to chew it for me first, since you apparently see me as a helpless invalid. Dante slowly rubbed his temples. Vanessa, I am asking you, please just eat something. I cannot, she declared, dropping the fork onto her plate with a loud, deliberate clatter. My left hand is completely useless, and my right hand is exhausted from having to carry this entire relationship by myself. It was nothing short of a theatrical performance, a loud and vulgar display designed to humiliate Dante until he surrendered to her demands. Sarah stood quietly near a marble pillar, watching everything unfold. She had been raised in a tough neighborhood in Queens and had learned from a young age how to read people's body language. She knew how to distinguish genuine pain from a calculated act. Vanessa was not in any pain. She was simply bored and cruel. Then, the very first crack appeared in her carefully constructed facade. A busboy, a young man named Leo, who had only started working that week, was clearing the adjacent table. He was visibly nervous. As he turned, his elbow accidentally bumped the corner of Dante's table. A heavy, ornate silver salt shaker began to wobble. The shaker balanced precariously on the very edge of the tablecloth. Then, gravity asserted its control. The shaker tipped over and began to fall directly toward Vanessa's lap. The entire event happened in less than a blink of an eye. Vanessa's supposedly useless left hand shot out from beneath the napkin on her lap. Her reflexes were astonishing, like the strike of a cobra. She caught the heavy silver shaker in midair, just inches before it would have stained her expensive silk dress. Her grip on it was like iron. There was no sign of a tremor, no hint of weakness. She had plucked it from the air with the incredible precision of a highly trained fighter or a professional athlete. For one split second, Vanessa was completely frozen. She was holding the heavy shaker in her paralyzed left hand. Her fingers were wrapped firmly around the cool metal. She slowly looked up from the shaker. Her eyes immediately found and locked with Sarah's. Sarah was the only person in the restaurant who had seen it happen. Dante was preoccupied, looking down at his phone. The young busboy was staring at the floor, apologizing profusely. Vanessa's eyes grew wide with pure panic, which then instantly morphed into a look of venomous, unadulterated hatred. She understood in that moment that the waitress had witnessed her perfect lie unravel. Slowly, with immense deliberation, Vanessa placed the salt shaker back onto the table. She then allowed her hand to go completely limp once more, letting it fall into her lap like a dead fish. "You clumsy fool!" Vanessa shrieked, turning all her fury on the terrified busboy as a diversion. "You nearly destroyed a $10,000 dress. Dante, you have to fire him. Fire him this instant." "It did not even touch you, Vanessa," Dante said, his gaze still fixed on his phone. "He threatened my personal safety," she lied, her voice climbing an octave higher. "I am shaking all over. Just look at me. I am trembling." She held up her right hand, forcing it to shake theatrically for effect. But her left hand, the one that had just performed a miraculous catch, remained carefully hidden beneath the table. Sarah took a small step forward. She could not stand by and allow Leo to be fired. She knew he had 2 young children at home. "Ma'am, Leo is extremely sorry. It was a complete accident. I saw the entire thing happen. Nothing touched you." Vanessa's head snapped around. Vanessa's head snapped toward Sarah, her eyes filled with cold fire. "You witnessed every second of that." The menace in her tone was unmistakable, a clear and present danger. "If you say one word about this, I will utterly ruin you." Sarah met her stare, her own voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "Yes, ma'am. I saw precisely what occurred." A smile spread across Vanessa's face, but it was a chilling, predatory smile that held no warmth. "Is that a fact? Well, seeing as you are so very attentive, perhaps you could fetch my main course and also bring me a clean fork. This one appears to be soiled." She lifted her own fork, a heavy piece of sharp silver cutlery designed for steak, and held it out toward Sarah. But instead of placing it in her hand, she let it fall to the polished floor. "Oops," Vanessa said, her voice now dripping with a thick, artificial sweetness. "My clumsy hand! You should probably pick that up for me." Sarah's eyes moved from the gleaming fork on the floor to the triumphant look on Vanessa's face. This had nothing to do with a piece of silverware. It was a power play, a demand for total submission. But Sarah's thoughts were racing, connecting the dots. Why would she fake an injury so elaborately? What was the point of this entire performance? Then she recalled a piece of gossip Rocco mentioned in the kitchen, the prenuptial agreement. If Vanessa could prove she had a disability before the wedding, a standard prenup could potentially be invalidated based on medical dependency. She was laying the groundwork to claim she was unable to work, incapable of supporting herself. It was a calculated setup for a lifetime of alimony payments, a financial trap being set long before any wedding ring was officially on her finger. She was playing Dante Moretti for a fool. Sarah bent down, her knees nearly touching the floor as she reached for the fork. As her fingers closed around the cool silver, her eyes caught something else just beneath the table's edge. Vanessa's legs were crossed, and the hem of her expensive dress had crept up just enough to reveal a secret. There, on Vanessa's supposedly weak left calf, a place normally hidden by long gowns or boots, was a tattoo. It was small and faded, the kind of ink that looked like it was done in a prison yard. The symbol was distinct and horrifying, a black widow spider enclosed within a triangle. Sarah went completely still. She recognized that mark. She had seen it on people back when she was growing up in Queens. This was not some trendy sorority emblem or a simple fashion choice. That symbol belonged to a dangerous and notorious ring of female con artists known as the Widows, who ran their operations out of New Jersey back in the early 2000s. Their entire method was seducing wealthy men, faking debilitating medical issues, and then stripping them of every asset they possessed. Vanessa Sterling was not from some old, established family. She was not a genuine socialite. She was a professional grifter, likely a woman named Veronica Stiles, and Sarah had just stumbled upon the one piece of leverage that could bring her down. Sarah quickly backed away and retreated to the rear of the kitchen. Her hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the sudden, powerful surge of adrenaline that came with this revelation. She burst through the swinging doors, entering the hot, humid chaos of the dishwashing area. The deafening roar of the industrial sanitizing machines completely drowned out the smooth jazz music drifting from the elegant dining room. She had to be absolutely certain. Ducking behind a tall stack of clean drying crates, Sarah pulled out her old, cracked iPhone. Her fingers moved with lightning speed across the screen. She sent a text to her cousin Mike, a man who had served 5 years in Trenton State Prison and knew the meaning of every gang symbol on the entire East Coast. "I need an ID on a tattoo. It is a spider inside a triangle, all black ink. It looks old. Who uses that?" The 3 small dots of the typing indicator popped up almost immediately. He replied, Stay far away from that, Sarah. Those are the Black Widows. They are a Jersey crew, all-female con artists. They only go after men with very deep pockets. Why are you asking? Sarah didn't answer him. She felt a cold, tight knot forming deep in her stomach. Her suspicion was true. Vanessa Sterling was so much more than a spoiled, entitled socialite. She was an apex predator. The supposed nerve damage, the elegant cane, the dramatic displays of helplessness, it was all just one big, elaborate con. If she successfully married Dante Moretti, she would likely divorce him within 6 months, claiming his demanding lifestyle made her condition worse, and she would walk away with half of his entire empire. Or, even worse, she would wait until the moment the ink was dry on the marriage certificate and then orchestrate some kind of tragic accident for him. Sarah, Mr. Ritchie, the manager, barked, his head peering around the corner. Table 4 is asking for you. And they are asking for you by name. Vanessa is telling everyone she wants to apologize to you for that incident with the fork. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice in her veins. Apologize? A woman like her? I know, Ritchie whispered, nervously wiping his forehead with a folded handkerchief. It is extremely strange. Just go out there, and for the love of God, please smile. Sarah straightened her apron and forced herself to walk back out onto the floor. The shift from the loud, chaotic kitchen to the silent, velvet-draped dining room was intensely jarring. When she got close to the table, she could feel that the entire atmosphere had changed. Dante was just staring down into his wine glass, looking less like a powerful kingpin and more like a man on death row. Vanessa, on the other hand, was absolutely beaming. Ah, there she is, Vanessa cooed in a sugary voice. She reached out with her perfectly fine right hand and patted the empty chair right beside her. Come a little closer, my dear. I feel just dreadful about dropping my fork like that earlier. My nerves, you understand, they sometimes just completely misfire. Sarah took a cautious step forward, keeping her hands tightly clasped behind her back. It is no trouble at all, Miss Sterling. Please, you must call me Vanessa, she purred. And then her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, so low it was almost lost beneath the clinking of silverware from the surrounding tables. Lean in for a moment. I have a little secret I want to tell you. Sarah hesitated for a split second, then bent down just slightly. Vanessa turned her head to face her. The warm smile completely disappeared from her face, instantly replaced by a look of cold, shark-like aggression. Her eyes drilled into Sarah's. I saw you looking at my leg, Vanessa whispered. Her voice was stripped of that phony, high society accent. It was now raw and guttural, the voice of the street. You think you are so smart, don't you, because you grew up in the gutter? Let me tell you something. I own the gutter. If you open your mouth about anything you think you saw, I will not just have you fired. I will personally plant enough cocaine in your locker to make sure you go away for 20 years. Do we have an understanding? She then pulled back, and that fake, dazzling smile snapped back onto her face like a mask. Oh, Dante, look at her. She is just so sweet. She forgives me. Sarah stood up straight, her heart beating against her ribs like a terrified, trapped bird. She looked over at Dante. He was watching Sarah intently, his dark eyes narrowing just a little. He had not heard the whisper, but he had definitely seen the sudden change in Sarah's posture. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. Get her a glass of champagne, Sarah, Dante said. His voice was commanding, but there was a surprising note of kindness in it. And also, bring me the check. We are going to be leaving early. No. Vanessa slammed her hand down on the table. It was her right hand, fortunately. We have not even had our dessert yet. I ordered the soufflé. You know I need the sugar, Dante. My blood sugar gets so terribly low when I am in this much pain. Dante stared at his fiancée, his expression a clear mix of deep exhaustion and growing suspicion. You have been complaining about the pain all evening, Vanessa. Perhaps we should just go straight to the hospital. I do not need a hospital, she snapped back at him. I need my soufflé. Sarah slowly backed away from the table. I will go and check on the dessert for you. As she walked toward the kitchen, she knew she was facing a critical choice. She could just keep her head down, serve the chocolate souffle, and allow Dante to walk straight into a trap that could easily cost him his entire fortune or maybe even his life. Or she could stand up and fight back. Her thoughts went to her father. He was a good man, a hard-working union carpenter who was completely destroyed by a loan shark who used complicated fine print and a string of fake promises to steal their family home. She despised bullies. She despised liars. And at that moment, she truly, deeply hated Vanessa Sterling. She needed solid proof, something that was absolutely undeniable. She headed for the kitchen, but instead of checking on the souffle, she went directly to the security office. The door, thankfully, was unlocked. The night guard, an older man named Gus, was starting to doze off, in his chair in front of the wall of monitors. Gus, Sarah whispered, gently shaking his shoulder. Huh? What is it? Gus jumped in his seat, quickly adjusting his uniform cap. I need you to pull up the video feed from camera 3, the one right above the VIP section, from about 20 minutes ago. Sarah, I cannot do that. Richie will have my head. Please, Gus. This is a matter of life or death. I mean that literally. Gus looked at her worried, desperate face and let out a long sigh. He typed in a password and the screens in front of them flickered to life. Sarah used the controls to rewind the footage. And there it was, the salt shaker falling from the table, Vanessa's hand shooting out with lightning speed. The perfect catch, the brief freeze on her face, the moment of realization that she had been seen. Holy cow, Gus breathed out. Did you see that? Reflex on her? That woman moves like some kind of ninja. Can you save that specific clip for me? Sarah asked, her voice urgent. I can put it onto a drive for you. But Sarah, if you actually use this, you are officially declaring war on the future Mrs. Moretti. You do realize who her fiancé is, don't you? I know, Sarah replied, her eyes glued to the monitor. But just look at him. She pointed to the live video feed. Dante was sitting at the table, rubbing his temples while Vanessa was now berating a poor busboy over something trivial. He does not look like a happy man, Gus. He looks like a target. Just as Gus was about to copy the video file, the door to the security office swung wide open. It was not Mr. Ritchie. It was one of Dante's bodyguards. He was a mountain of a man named Enzo, with a neck as thick as a large tree trunk. He completely filled the doorway, effectively blocking any chance of an exit. Mr. Moretti wants the check, Enzo rumbled in a deep voice. And the lady is asking where her waitress disappeared to. She said you have been gone for far too long. She is starting to think you are stealing something. Sarah's stomach plummeted. Vanessa was already moving on to phase 2 of her plan, which was to completely discredit the only witness. I am coming right now, Sarah said, quickly stepping away from the monitors. She gave one last meaningful look to Gus, silently pleading with him to save the tape, and then she followed Enzo back into the lion's den. The dining room was much quieter now. Most of the early pre-theater diners had already departed, leaving behind only the most serious drinkers and the city's powerful deal-makers. When Sarah finally arrived back at table 4, she found Vanessa in the middle of a full-blown performance, complete with tears. They were crocodile tears, of course. Huge, glistening drops of moisture rolled down her perfectly powdered cheeks. It is gone, Dante. It is completely gone, she wailed, dramatically clutching at her wrist. What is gone? Dante asked, and his patience was now visibly wearing paper thin. My bracelet. It was the vintage Cartier bracelet you gave me for our 3-month anniversary. I had to take it off because it was starting to chafe my wrist, because of my sensitive skin, and I put it right here on the table, just next to the bread basket, and now it has vanished. Dante glanced down at the table. It was completely bare, except for their wine glasses and the last remnants of their dinner plates. Are you absolutely certain you did not put it inside your bag? Dante asked her. I already checked my bag. It is not in there. Vanessa then pointed a trembling, accusing finger directly at Sarah. She is the one who took it. She has been the only other person at this table. I saw her staring at it earlier this evening. She has been jealous of me all night long. The terrible accusation just hung there in the silent air like a thick cloud of smoke. Every single head in the restaurant slowly turned to look at them. Sarah held her position, her voice unwavering. I never laid a hand on your bracelet, Miss Sterling. Vanessa's response was a piercing shriek. Liar, she screamed, her eyes wild. Dante, search her right now. Have Enzo check her. I am certain she has concealed it somewhere in her apron. Dante rose from his seat with a deliberate, almost chilling slowness. He took a moment to fasten the button on his suit jacket, his gaze shifting from Sarah's defiant face to Vanessa's theatrical outrage. Enzo. Dante's voice was a low command. His bodyguard moved forward without a word. Examine the floor, Dante instructed, his tone flat. Look carefully under the table. You are defending her over me? Vanessa gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace in disbelief. I am the woman you are going to marry. This girl, this waitress, is a common thief, and you want to search the carpet? I do not make accusations without evidence, Vanessa, Dante replied, his words laced with ice. Enzo, do as I said. With a professional nod, Enzo crouched, clicking on a small, powerful flashlight. He methodically swept the bright beam across the dark floor beneath the table. Nothing here, boss, he reported. Vanessa pushed herself to her feet, putting her full weight on a decorative cane. Well, if it is not on the floor, it must be on her person. Check her pockets. If you refuse, I will call the police this instant. And there it was. The trap Sarah knew was coming snapped shut in her mind. It was so clear now. Vanessa must have discreetly taken the bracelet herself, then planted it in Sarah's apron when she had leaned in close to deliver that venomous threat just moments ago. It was a classic setup, the bump and the plant. A search would prove her guilt. A search meant she would be arrested and sent to jail. Her word against Vanessa's about the injured hand would become worthless. Vanessa would walk away with a complete victory. Sarah could feel a small, hard object pressing against her thigh from inside her left apron pocket. A cold lump that had not been there moments before. She was utterly cornered. Fine, Sarah heard herself say, her tone surprisingly firm. You can search me, but we will not do it here, not in the manager's office with him as the only witness. Why ever not? Vanessa challenged, a flicker of fear in her eyes at the thought of a wider audience for her potential humiliation. No, Sarah insisted, meeting Dante's intense stare directly. Because when my innocence is proven, I do not want you claiming I secretly dropped the bracelet on the floor to get rid of it. We need a clean room. Dante observed her for a long moment. He saw the fire of defiance burning in her gaze, but beneath it, he recognized something far rarer: absolute integrity. My office, Dante announced with finality. We go now. The short walk to the manager's office felt like a solemn procession to an execution. In the corridor, Mr. Ritchie was breathing in short, panicked gasps, on the verge of a full-blown anxiety attack. Dante moved with a predatory stillness, an aura of deadly calm surrounding him. Vanessa followed, leaning on her cane with an air of smug tragedy. Once inside the confined space, Sarah positioned herself in the very middle of the room, alone. Empty your pockets, Dante commanded. Sarah complied, first reaching into her right pocket. She pulled out her server's notepad, a simple pen, and a wine key, placing each item deliberately on the polished wooden desk. Then she moved her hand to her left pocket, the one that held the cold, damning lump of metal. Her fingers closed around the object. There was no mistaking it. It was the bracelet. She could feel the sharp edges of the diamonds. If she brought it into the light, her life as she knew it was over. But Sarah had a hidden advantage. Before her cousin Mike went to prison, he had taught her a thing or two about misdirection, lessons learned on the tough streets of Queens. Wait, Sarah said, interrupting the silence. Before I show you what is in this pocket, I need to ask Miss Sterling a question. Just take it out, Vanessa hissed, her patience gone. No, Dante countered, his eyes fixed on Sarah. Let her ask the question. Sarah kept her hand buried in her pocket, her knuckles tight around the expensive jewelry. Miss Sterling, you claimed you removed the bracelet because the metal was irritating. Your wrist. Which wrist was that? Vanessa blinked, momentarily caught off guard. My left wrist, of course, the one that is injured. The pressure was aggravating the nerve damage. And I assume you used your right hand to remove it, Sarah continued. Obviously, Vanessa snapped. My left hand is completely paralyzed. So, Sarah said, her words measured and clear, you are telling us that you managed to unfasten a complex Cartier security clasp, one that requires 2 fingers to pinch the sides and a third to pull it open, using the fingers of only one hand. That is a physical impossibility for anyone without assistance, unless, of course, your left hand is not paralyzed at all. I used my teeth to help, Vanessa stammered, her explanation weak. Then show us, Sarah challenged, her confidence growing. Here is Mr. Ritchie's watch. Put this watch on your left wrist and then take it off using only your right hand and your teeth. If you can accomplish that, I will immediately empty my pocket for everyone to see, but if you cannot, then it suggests you might be lying about more than just a stolen bracelet. An absolute quiet fell over the small office. It was an enormous risk. Sarah was wagering that Vanessa's pride would force her to try, but that the simple laws of physics would ensure her failure. This is completely absurd, Vanessa shouted, turning to Dante for support. Dante, make her stop this. Do it, Vanessa, Dante said. The bored indifference was gone from his voice, replaced by something as hard and cold as steel. If what you say is true, this should be a simple task. Show me how you did it. Vanessa glared at the inexpensive timepiece Mr. Ritchie was now holding out. A dark red flush crept up her neck and over her face. Her eyes darted from Dante's unreadable expression to Sarah's steady gaze. The room suddenly felt suffocating, the walls pressing in on her. Fine, she finally shrieked. She snatched the watch from Mr. Ritchie with her good hand. She clumsily slapped it against her left wrist, but her fingers fumbled, unable to secure the simple clasp using only one hand. The watch slipped and clattered against the desk. She simply could not do it. It is not the same, Vanessa cried, her voice cracking with desperation. The Cartier clasp is designed differently. It is easier. It is actually much harder, Dante stated flatly. It is a double-locking safety clasp. I know this because I am the one who purchased it. He then turned his full attention to Sarah. Empty your pocket. Sarah drew a slow, steadying breath. She pulled her hand from her apron. Vanessa's lips curled into a triumphant smirk, her eyes hungry for the sparkle of diamonds. Sarah opened her palm. It was completely empty. Vanessa's mouth fell open in shock. What? But how can it be gone? You put it where, exactly? Dante asked, his voice sinking to a lethal whisper. What were you about to say, Vanessa? That you put it in her pocket? The color drained from Vanessa's face, leaving it a sickly white. No, I meant to say, I saw her put it there with my own eyes. Search me, Sarah said, raising her arms away from her body. Enzo, please, go ahead. The bodyguard performed a quick professional pat-down. She is clean, boss. Sarah had used one of the oldest tricks in the service industry. As she had entered the office, her path took her directly past the large canvas bin for dirty table linens. In a single fluid movement, completely shielded by the turn of her body, she had expertly flicked the diamond bracelet from her pocket deep into the pile of soiled napkins. It was an incredible risk, but it was the only way to remove the planted evidence from her person. She does not have it, Dante stated, his voice final. He turned back to Vanessa. So, I will ask again. Where is it? She must have swallowed it, Vanessa sputtered, grasping at the most ridiculous excuse she could imagine. Enough, Dante commanded. Enzo, escort Vanessa to the car. You are throwing me out? Vanessa screeched in outrage. I am your fiancée. Not anymore, you are not, Dante replied coldly. Go to the car. I have some business to conclude here. Vanessa shot Sarah a look of such pure, undiluted hatred it was terrifying. She spun around and limped toward the door, but in her fury, she completely forgot about her cane and her supposed injury. She took 4 perfectly balanced steps before she caught her mistake, at which point she stumbled dramatically and clutched the door frame for support. Dante observed the entire pathetic performance. He remained silent until the office door clicked shut. Then, he looked at Sarah. You are very clever. Far too clever to be waiting tables. A girl has to pay her rent, Sarah replied, her voice finally starting to tremble now that the immediate threat had vanished. You did not steal the bracelet, Dante said. It was a declaration, not a question. But you know its location. It is in the laundry bin over there, Sarah confessed, her energy fading. She slipped it into my pocket when she leaned over to whisper in my ear. Dante crossed the room to the bin and began to dig through the used napkins. A moment later, he pulled out the diamond bracelet, which glittered brilliantly even in the dim office light. He held it up, examining it. Why? Dante asked, his eyes finding hers. Why go through all of this? You could have just let her frame you. Why choose to fight her? Because, Sarah said, an image of her late father flashing in her mind. I cannot stand people who take advantage of those who cannot see. Dante looked at her, his expression puzzled. I am not blind. Are you not? Sarah challenged, emboldened by her victory. She is a professional con artist, Mr. Moretti. That injury to her hand is a complete fabrication. She is positioning you for a divorce settlement that would cost you millions. She is not even Vanessa Sterling. The tattoo you might have seen on her leg, the spider, it is the mark of a criminal ring of grifters. They call themselves the Black Widows. Dante became absolutely still. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. The Black Widows? He repeated, the name tasting like poison. Yes. My cousin recognized the style of the ink. She is not the person she claims to be. And if you proceed with this marriage, she and her associates will strip you of everything you own. Dante stared down at the expensive bracelet resting in his palm. He had the look of a man violently shaken from a long and terrible dream. I am going to need proof, Dante said, his voice tight. Hard proof, more than a fumbled watch or a momentary stumble. I have video, Sarah stated. There is security camera footage of her catching a falling salt shaker with her supposedly paralyzed hand. My friend Gus, the bartender, has a copy of it. Dante gave a slow, deliberate nod. Get the video. But before Sarah could even take a step, the phone on the manager's desk began to ring shrilly. Mr. Ritchie picked it up, listened for a few seconds, and his face went white with fear. It is the front desk, he stammered. The police are here. They said they received an anonymous tip that a waitress was selling illegal drugs on the premises. They have a search warrant for the employee lockers. Sarah's blood ran cold. Vanessa. Of course. She did not just plant the bracelet. She had a devastating backup plan ready to go. My locker, Sarah whispered in horror. If the police find anything in your locker, Dante said, his voice grim, my influence will not be able to protect you. Not with a warrant, not tonight. The new commissioner is watching my every move. I did not do anything, Sarah cried, tears welling in her eyes. I know, Dante said, his gaze shifting to the office window that overlooked the back alley. You have to leave, now, before they come back to this office. Run? Sarah asked, shocked. If I run, I will look like I am guilty. If you stay, you will go to jail, Dante countered. She is playing chess, and she is 2 moves ahead of you. You need to go. Find out who she really is. I need her real name. If you can bring me proof that she is a Black Widow, then I can take care of everything else. Dante reached into his coat, produced a sleek black metal business card, with a private number embossed in gold foil, and pressed it firmly into her hand. "Run, Sarah, and do not stop running until you have found the truth." Sarah clutched the card tightly in her hand. She could hear the distinct, heavy sound of police boots approaching in the main hallway. She did not waste another second. She kicked off her uncomfortable work heels and burst through the back door, sprinting into the cold, rainy alley. In that moment, she left behind her job, her night's tips, and the simple life she once knew. A new, dangerous hunt had just begun. The neon sign for the Starlight Motel in Queens sputtered and buzzed, casting a sickly, flickering yellow glow into the dreary space of room 104. Sarah was perched on the edge of a stained, sagging mattress. Her damp work uniform was draped over a rusty radiator, slowly drying. She had been awake for more than 24 agonizing hours. She stared at the black business card Dante had given her. It felt like her one and only connection to survival, but she knew she could not use it yet. She needed leverage, real ammunition, before she made that call. A sudden heavy knock on the motel room door made her leap to her feet. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she grabbed the base of a cheap table lamp, wielding it like a club. "It is me," a rough voice rasped through the thin door. "It is Mike." Sarah fumbled with the locks and opened the door. Her cousin Mike quickly slipped inside, shaking droplets of rain from the shoulders of his worn leather jacket. He looked like he had been through a war, with faded scars across his knuckles and intricate tattoos crawling up the side of his neck. But his eyes, she noted, were still kind. He was holding a thick manila envelope. "You really got yourself into some deep trouble this time, cuz," Mike said, as he tossed the heavy envelope onto the bed. The news reports were a nightmare, showing the police as they tore Lauro apart from the inside out. They said they discovered an ounce of pure, uncut cocaine that had been taped securely inside my locker. On every channel, they gave me a new name: the Waitress Kingpin. "That woman framed you," Sarah insisted, her voice tight with rage. "I have to find out who she really is, Mike. You have to tell me you uncovered something useful." Mike lowered himself into the chair across from me, his face a mask of grim reality. "I called in some favors with old contacts back in Jersey. That tattoo you saw, the spider inside the triangle? It's the mark of the widow's circle. They are not a street gang, Sarah. Think of them as a club for women who are complete sociopaths." He carefully opened the manila envelope. From inside, he pulled out 3 printed images and arranged them on the table. They were grainy, old photographs, all in black and white. "This is Veronica Stiles," Mike stated, tapping his finger on the first picture. In the photo, the woman was younger, with unstyled dark hair and no trace of makeup, yet her eyes were absolutely the same. They were cold, empty, like a shark's. She was arrested back in 2018 on fraud charges. The case was dismissed after the main witness vanished without a trace. Then, in 2020, she married a technology chief executive officer in Seattle. He suffered a fatal heart attack just 3 months later. She was the sole heir to his entire fortune. In 2022, she wed a Texas oil tycoon. He had a tragic accident, falling from his yacht. She collected the insurance payout. Sarah reached for the photographs, her fingers trembling slightly. She constantly changes her appearance, her identity, her entire life story. But the pattern is always identical. She finds an extremely wealthy man to marry, and then those men always end up dead. "And this is the part that will turn your stomach," Mike continued, sliding a medical report across the table. "In every single one of these cases, the husband began to feel unwell weeks before his death. They complained of exhaustion, severe headaches, and mental confusion. The physicians diagnosed it as stress or some kind of passing viral illness, but my source is certain she administers digitalis, a poison derived from the foxglove plant. It induces heart failure, but is notoriously difficult to detect in an autopsy unless you are specifically searching for it." A chilling coldness washed over Sarah. The memory of Dante at the restaurant flashed in her mind, him pressing his temples, the deep, dark circles beneath his eyes, and the passive way he allowed Vanessa to control him. It was as if he lacked the basic energy to even argue with her. "He is not just worn out," Sarah whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. That woman is actively poisoning him right now. If she is performing this whole sick fiancé routine with the fabricated nerve damage Mike laid out, it gives her the ultimate alibi. Once he is gone, she can play the part of the heartbroken, helpless widow who desperately needs his vast estate to survive her debilitating condition. Nobody would ever suspect the grieving widow. "When are they getting married?" Sarah demanded, her voice urgent. Mike paused, and the look on his face told her everything. "That is the worst part. I checked all the celebrity news websites. After the immense stress from that incident at the restaurant, the supposed robbery by the waitress, Vanessa apparently had a complete emotional collapse. She managed to convince Dante that they needed to move the wedding date forward. They are scheduled to have a private signing of the legal documents tomorrow evening at his private estate out in the Hamptons. She's calling it a healing ceremony. Tomorrow night." Sarah shot to her feet, beginning to pace the confines of the tiny motel room. The moment he puts his signature on those documents, he is a dead man. As soon as she legally becomes his wife, she will administer the final dose. "Sarah, you cannot possibly go there," Mike warned, his tone serious. "Dante's estate is surrounded by an entire team of professional guards. The police are actively searching for you. If you even set one foot on that property, you will either be shot on sight or immediately arrested." "He gave me an opportunity," Sarah said, her gaze fixed on the business card in her hand. "He helped me escape." He sensed that something was deeply wrong, Mike. He just had no idea what it was. "I need to get this file to him." "You are a waitress from Queens, Sarah," Mike reminded her gently. "How in the world do you plan to infiltrate a compound that is as secure as a Mafia fortress?" Sarah stopped her pacing. She stared at her own image in the room's cracked, dusty mirror. The person looking back at her no longer resembled a waitress. The fear that had consumed her was gone, and in its place was a cold, razor-sharp anger. "I am not going to break in," Sarah stated calmly. "It is a wedding, Mike, and every wedding needs a catering staff." The Moretti estate in the Hamptons was not so much a home as it was a modern fortress cleverly disguised as a luxurious palace. It was protected by towering stone walls, massive iron gates, and teams of guards who patrolled the grounds with communication earpieces. Just inside the service entrance, the typical chaos of a major event preparation was in full motion. A catering business named Elite Events had trucks parked outside, with crews unloading endless arrangements of flowers, massive ice sculptures, and dozens of cases of expensive champagne. Sarah strode with purpose directly toward the supervisor who was clutching a clipboard. She had used cheap dye from a convenience store to turn her hair jet black in the motel sink, and had pulled it back into a tight, severe bun. She wore a pair of thick-rimmed glasses and a uniform she had lifted from a laundry service van parked 2 blocks away. "I am the replacement from the temp agency for your dishwasher, Sarah," announced, her voice deliberately flat and disinterested. "The agency said you were short a person." The supervisor, a completely stressed-out woman wearing a headset, barely glanced in her direction. "It is about time. Find an apron over there. I am putting you on glass polishing duty. Do not break a single one of them, or I will take it out of your soul." Just like that, Sarah was inside. The kitchen was an overwhelming maze of stainless steel surfaces and yelling chefs. Sarah kept her head bowed low, carefully polishing champagne flutes one by one while her eyes methodically scanned every corner of the room. She had to find a way to get into the main hall. She had to find Dante before it was too late. "You, the new girl," one of the chefs barked at her. "Take this tray of appetizers to the library. The groom is meeting with his lawyers in there right now. Get moving." Sarah's heart nearly stopped. This was her chance. She quickly picked up the heavy silver tray, which was laden with smoked salmon blinis, and pushed her way through the imposing double doors. The house itself was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the kitchen. The floors were polished marble that reflected the light, and the walls were covered with priceless oil paintings. Sarah moved through the hallways, her heart pounding, until she located the library. The heavy, dark mahogany doors were open just a crack. She could clearly hear voices coming from inside. "I simply do not see the need for such a rush, Vanessa." A deep, authoritative voice rumbled. It was Dante's lawyer, a man named Mr. Giallo. "The prenuptial agreement has not been properly reviewed by your own legal counsel. If you proceed with signing the marriage license this evening, you will be waiving your rights to certain financial protections." "I do not give a damn about the money," Vanessa's voice replied, a pathetic, whining tone coloring her words. She was definitely in that room. "I just want to be his wife. My personal health is failing, Leo. All of the stress from that horrible waitress attacking me. Sometimes I feel like my own heart could just stop beating. I need to feel secure. I need the world to know that Dante is mine." Sarah pressed her eye to the narrow opening between the doors. Dante was seated in a large leather armchair positioned near the fireplace. He looked absolutely dreadful. His skin had a gray, unhealthy pallor, and his eyes were sunken and dark. He was holding a glass of scotch in one hand, but she could see that his hand was shaking with a noticeable tremor. It was a genuine tremor, not a fake one like the one Vanessa performed. Vanessa was positioned behind him, gently massaging his shoulders with her supposedly good hand. Her left hand was hanging uselessly at her side, artfully wrapped in an elegant silk bandage. "Just sign the documents, Dante," Vanessa whispered sweetly into his ear. "After that, we can finally get some rest. You look so very tired, my darling. I had the kitchen make you a special tea. It will help you get some sleep." On the small table right next to Dante sat a steaming cup of what appeared to be herbal tea. Sarah knew with absolute certainty what was really in that cup. One more dose of poison, and it could very well be the final one. Dante reached for the pen. He looked completely and utterly defeated. "Fine," he said. "If it will just end all the fighting, give me the documents." Sarah knew she was out of time. There was no room for a subtle approach. She violently kicked the library door, sending it crashing open. "Do not drink that tea," she yelled, letting the tray of blinis fall from her hands. The heavy silver platter hit the marble floor with a startling, deafening clang. Dante's head snapped up in shock. The lawyer fumbled and dropped his pen. Vanessa spun around to face the doorway, her expression instantly shifting from surprise to pure, unadulterated fury. "You!" Vanessa shrieked at the top of her lungs. "Security! Get security in here now! She is trying to poison you!" Sarah shouted, pulling the large glasses from her face. "Dante, you have to look at me. It is Sarah. The tea is filled with digitalis. It is the reason you have been so sick." Two enormous guards burst into the room from the main hallway, seizing Sarah firmly by the arms before she could get any closer to the table. "Get this raving lunatic out of my sight!" Vanessa screamed, her voice breaking with manufactured panic. "She is the stalker, the one who deals drugs. She came here to murder me." "Wait," Dante managed to croak out. He made an effort to stand, but his legs were unsteady and buckled beneath him. Let her talk." "Dante, my love, she is a dangerous woman," Vanessa pleaded, quickly moving to his side and physically blocking his line of sight to Sarah. "She has an obsession with you. She broke into our private home. You must allow Enzo to handle her properly." Enzo, the head of Dante's security detail, stepped into the room. He took one look at Sarah, then glanced at Dante. "Boss, what are your orders?" Enzo asked, his voice calm and professional. "Just check the tea," Sarah gasped, struggling fiercely against the tight grip of the guards. "Test the contents of the tea and then check her leg for the tattoo. You have to ask her about her husband who died in Seattle. Ask her about the oil baron who fell from his yacht." For a fleeting moment, Vanessa's face turned ghostly white, but she recovered with incredible speed. "She is completely insane. Just look at her. She is probably high on her own drugs." Vanessa then snatched the cup of tea from the table. "You actually think this is poison? Fine. I will drink it myself. I will drink it right here and now, just to prove that this piece of trash is lying. She raised the ceramic cup to her lips. Sarah immediately stopped struggling. She watched Vanessa's every move with intense focus. Vanessa tilted the cup back. She appeared to take a small sip. Then she slammed the cup back down on the table with a loud crack. Do you see? Vanessa sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. It is just chamomile tea. Now get her out of this house and call the police immediately. Dante stared at Sarah, and the flicker of hope that had been in his eyes completely died out. He collapsed back into the heavy armchair, looking utterly defeated. Sarah, why would you do this? I am sorry, Mr. Moretti, Enzo said, placing a firm hand on Sarah's shoulder. I have to secure the premises now. Sarah felt herself being pulled backward out of the room. She watched as Vanessa allowed a tiny, triumphant smirk to curl the corner of her lip. But Sarah's sharp eyes had caught something critical. When Vanessa had pretended to sip the tea, her throat had not moved. There was no swallowing motion. She had faked it. It was another performance, just like the injured hand, just like her supposed love for Dante. Sarah was forcibly ejected from the library and then dragged down the long, silent hallway. Wait, Sarah shouted, twisting her head to look at Enzo. You need to check her pocket. She never actually swallowed the tea. She either spat it discreetly back into the cup or she is still holding it in her mouth. Enzo, I am begging you. You know who I am. I was the one who returned the diamond bracelet. I am not a thief. Enzo came to a halt. The incident with the bracelet had happened. He knew for a fact that Sarah possessed integrity, and he could not deny that Dante's health had been declining ever since Vanessa had taken up residence in the estate. Hold her right here, Enzo commanded the other guards. What are you planning to do? One of the guards asked him. I am going to have someone check that tea, Enzo grunted with determination. But before he could take a single step back toward the library, a piercing scream echoed down the marble hallway. Dante! Oh my God, Dante, someone help! Enzo and the other guards immediately ran back, pulling a struggling Sarah along with them. Inside the library, Dante was on the floor, collapsed in a heap and convulsing violently. A white foam was beginning to form at the corners of his mouth. He is having a heart attack, Vanessa wailed dramatically. She stood over his shaking body, wringing her hands together in a display of grief. Both of her hands. I told everyone the stress would kill him. He is gone. Somebody call 911. Sarah wrenched herself free from the grip of a distracted guard and immediately rushed to Dante's side. She pressed her fingers to his neck to check his pulse. It was there, but it was faint and thready. He is not dead, Sarah announced. But he will be soon. If model, we have to get the poison out of him. Get away from Dante now. Vanessa launched herself at Sarah, a sudden predator who had completely forgotten her support of Cain, her fabricated limp. She struck Sarah with a shocking amount of force. Sarah stumbled backward, losing her balance, and her hand slapped against the metal dinner cart that had been brought in for the contract signing. Her fingers desperately curled around the cold, unforgiving steel of a piece of cutlery, a heavy silver dinner fork. Her eyes locked on Vanessa. The woman stood over Dante like a guard, physically blocking the security detail, actively preventing anyone from helping him. She was deliberately letting him perish. In that moment, she was all-powerful, an indestructible force. She was a black widow, perfectly at home in the center of her deadly web. But even the most fearsome spider has a vulnerability. Sarah struggled back onto her feet, her hand tightening around the fork, the tines pressing into her palm. Stabbing Vanessa was not an option. The guards would shoot her on the spot. No, she had to do something smarter. She needed to expose the fraud. She had to shatter the illusion Vanessa had so carefully built. Hey, Veronica, Sarah's voice rang out, using the name she had seen on that old mugshot. The effect was immediate. Vanessa went perfectly still. Her head jerked upward, her eyes wide with shock. Sarah yelled, "Catch!" She did not aim the fork at Vanessa's torso or legs. She hurled it directly at Vanessa's face. The throw was incredibly fast and hard, the utensil spinning through the air like a silver bullet. It was a simple, brutal test of reflexes. If Vanessa was truly a frail invalid, she would cringe or flinch, and the fork would hit her. But if she was a deadly imposter with finely honed survival instincts, without a single thought, Vanessa's paralyzed left hand shot up like a striking snake. It was a pure primal instinct for self-preservation. Her fingers closed around the fork just inches from her left eye. Her grip was flawless, a perfect combat hold. Her arm was rock steady. The entire room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. There stood Vanessa, the supposedly crippled and helpless fiancée, holding a simple dinner fork with the deadly precision of a trained killer, using the very hand she claimed was useless. She was standing guard over the dying body of the Don. Enzo saw it clearly. The family lawyer saw it. Every single guard in the room saw it. The devastating reality of her mistake washed over Vanessa. Her gaze fell to the fork in her hand. Then she slowly looked up at the circle of armed men now staring at her. "Uh-oh," Sarah breathed into the stillness. The silence that filled the grand library was absolutely deafening. The moment stretched for what felt like a lifetime, but lasted only 3 seconds. Vanessa remained frozen in place, the silver fork clutched in her supposedly paralyzed left hand, her arm still raised in a perfect, instinctive defensive block. Adrenaline. Vanessa's voice was a piercing shriek that cracked under the strain. She suddenly flung the fork to the ground as if it were white hot. It was a miracle. The shock of it all. It must have woken up my nerves. "Just save it," Enzo growled, his voice low and dangerous. He drew his pistol, but he did not point it at Sarah. He leveled it directly at Vanessa. "Step away from the boss now." "Enzo, have you lost your mind?" Vanessa pleaded as she backed away, raising both of her hands. "I am his fiancée. That waitress is the real enemy here." "I saw the catch, Vanessa," Enzo stated coldly, his eyes never leaving her as he moved to stand between her and Dante's body. "And I also saw you fake that sip of tea. You never actually swallowed a drop." Enzo swiftly picked up the delicate teacup Vanessa had placed on the table. He brought it to his nose and sniffed. The distinct smell of bitter almonds. "And you are still standing." "He is having a heart attack," Vanessa screamed, desperately pointing at Dante, who was struggling for breath on the expensive rug. "He needs a doctor, not some ridiculous interrogation. Call the medics for him." Enzo barked the order to his men without looking away from her. Then he added, "And put cuffs on her this instant." "Do not you dare touch me," Vanessa snarled at the approaching guards. The mask of the grieving fiancé was finally gone, her beautiful face twisting into a mask of absolute, unrestrained fury. She reached into a hidden garter belt, not for a handkerchief, but for a small, sharp ceramic knife she had successfully hidden from the metal detectors. She lunged forward, but not at Enzo. He was too large, too much of a threat. She went for Dante. Her plan was clear. If she could not marry him for his fortune, she would finish the job and claim he died of natural causes before any help could arrive. "No!" Sarah yelled, throwing her own body into motion. She had no weapon to fight with. All she had was a serving tray. With all the strength she could find, she swung the heavy silver platter like a baseball bat. Clang! The sound echoed as the tray made brutal contact with the side of Vanessa's head. The small ceramic knife flew from her hand and skittered across the polished wooden floor. Vanessa collapsed onto the thick carpet, completely unconscious, her expensive designer gown draped around her like the clothes on a broken doll. "That was a nice swing," Enzo muttered, holstering his sidearm. He immediately dropped to his knees next to Dante. "Boss, you need to stay with us. The medics are just 2 minutes out." Sarah also fell to her knees beside the fallen man. His face was ghostly pale, and his skin was cold and damp. "He needs oxygen," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "Loosen his tie. We have to keep him awake." Dante's eyelids fluttered and then opened. He stared blankly at the ornate ceiling. Then his gaze shifted to find Sarah's face. He looked at the unconscious form of Vanessa on the floor, and then his eyes returned to Sarah. "You," Dante wheezed, his voice so faint it was barely a whisper. "You actually came back for me." "I did not finish my shift," Sarah replied, managing a weak smile even as tears began to stream down her cheeks. Someone had to clear the table. 2 weeks later, the bold headline of the New York Post shouted, "Black Widow caught in her own web. Mafia fiancé finally exposed as a notorious serial killer." Sarah was sitting on a bench in Central Park, reading the full article. The police had discovered a vial of digitalis poison hidden inside Vanessa's expensive vanity case. They uncovered forged medical records that detailed her fake illness. They found the passports of 3 previous husbands, all of whom had died under suspicious circumstances. Veronica Stiles, who used the alias Vanessa Sterling, was going to prison for the rest of her life with no chance of parole. Sarah carefully folded the newspaper. She was finally free. The police had dropped all the charges against her the moment Enzo presented the restaurant's security footage from that first night, but freedom came with a price. She was now without a job, without any money, and was officially homeless since she had used her last few dollars to check out of her motel room that very morning. She watched the autumn leaves drift down from the trees, wondering if her old boss Laura would ever consider giving her job back. It seemed highly unlikely. "I have always preferred the view from my own terrace," a familiar voice commented. Sarah looked up, startled. A sleek black town car was parked quietly at the curb. Dante Moretti was standing there, leaning on a simple cane, a real one this time. As he recovered from the powerful toxin, he appeared thinner, but the healthy color had returned to his face. He was wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans, looking less like a feared mafia don and more like an ordinary man who had been granted a second chance at his life. "Mr. Moretti," Sarah said, quickly getting to her feet, "I am so glad to see you are okay." "Dante," he corrected her gently. He walked toward the bench and then sat down. "Please, sit with me." Sarah sat down again. "I owe you a sincere apology," Dante began, "and I owe you a thank you. You saved my life, Sarah. You saved it twice. Once with a simple bracelet, and then again with a dinner fork." "I just did what anyone would have done," Sarah shrugged. "That is a very rare thing in my world," Dante said with a serious expression. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "I am aware that you lost your job. I know you also lost your apartment. This is a check for you. It is more than enough. Money to buy a new house or a restaurant or whatever else you might want. It belongs to you." Sarah stared at the white envelope. It was visibly thick with its contents. "I cannot possibly take this." "It is not charity," Dante insisted, his tone firm. "Think of it as a severance package for the single best waitress I have ever had the pleasure of meeting." Sarah paused for a long moment. "I do not want your money, Dante. I just want something else. I want to feel safe. I want a job where I do not have to constantly look over my shoulder in fear." A small smile touched Dante's lips. "I had to fire my head of security at the main office. He somehow missed a ceramic knife. I need to hire someone who is exceptionally observant, someone who always notices the little things, someone who is not afraid to swing a serving tray at a cold-blooded killer." Sarah could not help but laugh. "Are you trying to hire me? I do not know the first thing about security. You knew more than Enzo did when it mattered," Dante pointed out. "The job pays well into the 6 figures. It comes with full benefits, and I can promise you this: the napkins are always soft." Sarah truly looked at him then. She saw the man who existed behind the expensive suit and the fearsome reputation. He was not a monster. He was just a man who had become lonely enough to accidentally let a monster into his life. She took the envelope from his hand and then immediately handed it back to him. "Keep the money," Sarah said with confidence. "I will take the job." Dante extended his right hand toward her. "Welcome to the family, Sarah." As their hands shook, the sun finally broke through the gray clouds, casting a bright light on the silver head of the cane in Dante's hand. This was not some kind of fairy tale ending. This was real life. But sometimes, even in the complicated reality of life, the good guys get to win. And that is the story of how a simple dinner service brought down one of the most dangerous and successful con artists in modern history. Vanessa Sterling truly believed she could act her way into a massive fortune, but she made one critical mistake. She forgot the most important rule of all. You can try to lie to the boss, but you can never, ever lie to the staff. Sarah did not just save one man's life that day. She proved to everyone that sometimes the most powerful weapon in any room is not a gun. It is a simple silver fork and a pair of eyes that are willing to see the truth. If you enjoyed this story about justice being served ice cold, please take a moment to hit that like button. Your support really does help this channel grow. Go ahead and subscribe, and be sure to turn on your notifications so you will never miss a future story. And please tell me in the comments below, have you ever caught someone in a major lie just by paying close attention to their body language? This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories and valuable life lessons to our audience.